It's like when you add a new job, one of the things you have to ask yourself, even if you're a one-person company, what is the impact of the role I'm trying to hire? Like, why are we hiring this role? Why are we creating this role? What impact is it going to have on me and the company? If you can't answer that, and if you're only thinking about tasks that they're going to be doing, you probably shouldn't have that job.
Welcome to the Lendsetter Show, the show that blends the art of sales, the science of success, and the strategies of real experts in the mortgage and sales industries to help you grow your client base, increase your revenue, and get in control of your life. I'm your host, Preston Schmidley. Kick back, enjoy the episode, and don't forget to subscribe. What's going on, everybody? Preston Schmidley, your host of the Lendsetter Show, and I'm here with a good friend of mine and somebody that we lean on within Good Vibe Squad ourselves, as somebody that we really trust as an advisor to grow our company, Mr. Tony Wiseman of Wiseman Strategies, in my opinion, the leading certified partner of Predictive Index, which is a platform that we use. And so, first of all, Tony, thanks for being on the Lendsetter Show today. And I'd like for this discussion to orbit around, one of the things with loan officers that they're struggling with is they get to a certain level of success, and then maintaining that success becomes a bandwidth issue. And, they either have to struggle through that growth, they have to revert back to what they know, what's familiar. And so I'd really like to use your expertise as somebody who has really mastered the practice of talent acquisition, to help them navigate how to grow their business through other people so that they're not slowly killing themselves, just working just endlessly, right? So I guess with that said, why don't you dive in first to give kind of a framework to the listeners to essentially what you do, how you work with companies like us and obviously many other companies to advise them and empower them to really grow this talent acquisition machine within the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate you having me on, Preston. It's always
glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring down the good lookingness of your program here for an hour. So you have to deal with a fat old man talking to him. That's what they have to deal with. Look, I think, in the 27 years I've been doing this work, I think a great way to sum up what we do is we help companies understand how to recruit, train, manage, coach people as it relates to the objectives that they're trying to achieve inside their organization. So there's actually just a great article today in Fortune magazine about what is a 10X employee, and that's something out of Silicon Valley, I think, that kind of generated. How do we find these employees who are 10 times the worth of a typical employee, right? And then the article talks about this idea of hard skills being really important, like understanding what you're really good at from an origination standpoint. Like, what part of the origination am I really good at? Is it bringing in new clients? Is it networking? Is it understanding the business? Is it understanding how my intellectual capacity can help you get to any loan at any time? Because I'm so good with data, facts, numbers. So as part of that, right, understanding what you're really good at from a technical side. But the other side of this is understanding your natural, they call them soft skills in the article, which I don't love, but they call them soft skills. This ability to, how do I communicate? How do I think through problems? How do I evaluate risks? What kind of customers or clients I'm connecting to naturally? Which ones do I not? Those are some soft skills that really elevate you and your ability to grow your business.
So soft skills would almost be like different versions of intuition, or it's almost like your internal compass of sorts, it sounds like.
Yeah, I they call them soft skills. I call it your hardwiring. What is your hardwiring? How are you hardwired to do certain things? So maybe in your specific case, maybe I'm a really, really good individual contributor and I'm really hardwired. I'm a hunter. Like, I can go find new business and I'm great at it, right? That's what I'm really hardwired to do. Yet there's aspects of my job that requires me to kind of slow down and to process that stuff I've just hunted and to hang it out and to dry it, parse it up. And that part's boring to me and it sucks and I hate it. And it's holding me back to being more effective. How do you really understand that and intellectualize that and then do something proactive to kind of to alter that perspective, right?
Yeah.
That hardwiring is just like, who are you? What do you care about? What do you value? What do you need? Why did I go in this business in the first place? What drives you? Those kind of things.
Yeah. That makes sense. So what, it was actually funny. The first, well, it wasn't the first conversation we had, but the first conversation after we started working together, you had my predictive index score, and it was actually funny because you were talking about me like you've hung out with me for a long time, right? And which we found the accuracy of your reading of that impressive, and I'm sure part of that is at this point intuitive for you. Just when you could spend a minute with somebody, and after doing this for a while, it's like, oh okay, you're this type of person, personality wise, right? But you had taken my my kind of profile, if you will, and I mean, I was like, dang, you're speaking truth, man. So that was really profound for us, and honestly, in our hiring, and I'm very proud of the team that we have. We've gotten a lot of great talent and been able to sort through the noise, because on average, when we hire, we use Indeed and as our primary source, right? And depending on the job and how long we're posted for, I mean, we can get 500 to 1,200 applicants, right? And I really strive for that, because for me, I learned that anytime I'm trying to make a hiring decision without candidates, the best case scenario is going to be a desperate call, right? And that, I mean, I'm sure that you could get lucky, but the likelihood of that working well for you, I've just always believed if I can do it right, it's actually probably less costly just not to do it, right?
Yeah.
Rather than get the wrong person, waste 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then end up at the same inevitable result, now minus that labor budget, right? So, I guess my thing is, let's talk for a minute about, because I know Predictive Index is a big part of how you consult businesses like us. It's a very core component. Why don't you talk a little bit about Predictive Index why it's so powerful, and how that empowers you to do what you do?
Yeah, so Wiseman Strategies is a team of 5 professionals. We're all a little bit seasoned in our growth as workers in this field. So, we have a person who's really good at spent 20 plus years in leading and training and development inside of orgs, and one has been really instrumental in executive coaching and recruiting for the last 15, and project manager. And one of our newest associates is a young woman out of Texas, early 20s, who's behavioral science, actually studying the clinical side and now applying it to actually work in business. So Predictive Index at its core, it's been around for a long time, like 1952, 1955 was the first client, but it's a response to stimuli tool. And really what we're trying to understand and trying to measure is, given a certain set of stimuli, how does that person respond? And that's really what we're trying to measure. All things being equal, what does that look like? And so where most companies kind of make a mistake when it comes to recruiting is they don't understand what they need, right? And so one of the things we help clients understand is, what is the job demand, or what is the gap in your org or the gap in yourself that's going to help you make a more complete puzzle. Because unfortunately, a lot of times what we do, if we don't have any kind of data point to rely on, we talk to people and sometimes we just like the conversation, or we like what they say, or we like their experience, and we hire them. And that has nothing to do with how well they're going to do the job, or what you need them to do.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, you hire people for what they say they've done, and then you hate them for who they are, right? Or you don't like them for who they are. Yeah. And so it's like this idea of using data to say, okay, first and foremost, what do we need? And that hunter, scenario I gave you, you need someone who's going to process all the work that you've done, and they're going to think totally different than you. They're going to act different than you. They're going to process information different than you. And you have to be, okay, that's what I need in order for us to scale and to grow. You don't need 10 more hunters, right? Necessarily, right? You need to find out, how do we become more efficient with the things that I'm bringing in that's in turn.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for those that are listening to this, how would you compare? Because I think there's some similarity from a high level, if I was just kind of trying to explain this, but I feel in our experience, this has been way better. But I feel like it's kind of like the DISC, or something of that that. I mean, it's way more detailed, because you can do the individual, cognitive and behavioral, and then you can also kind of like overlay that with the team, and it'll give you management guidance and all kind. I mean, amazing tool, right? But like for the listeners, would you say that it's a personality or profile assessment of sorts, kind of like DISC or something like that?
So I think first of all, I think there's a lot of good tools out there. In fact, DISC is a tool my father used 30 years ago when he was building a consulting firm with athletic clubs, trying to match doctors to patients and selling memberships inside of a time frame to get people to stay, kind of a thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's actually so I've been familiar with some of these behavioral tools for a long time, and DISC is a good tool. There's other tools out there that are great tools. I think what differentiates us from some of these other tools is we really focus on work-related behaviors as it relates to response to stimuli. And what I mean by that is we do two things really, really, really well that I think other companies don't do as well, to be honest with you. The one is job defining. Like we do a great job of understanding what it takes to do a job in this tool. Mm-hmm. So for example, if you're, a processor versus an originator, we know the mechanical differences between those two kinds of jobs. But what is the job demanding of you? And can you actually make it objective? And can you write about it? Can you understand it? And once you understand kind of what that behavioral demand looks like, you start comparing and contrasting with people coming in to do that work, you can see gaps and fits really, really clearly.
Right.
And so our tool does that better, I think, than any tool on the market. As far as the idea of understanding people and behavior and work style preferences, I think there's a lot of tools that do that. Our company was invented specifically for business application.
Sure.
Some of these tools haven't been developed for that. Ours was for that reason. How can you be better as a business understanding talent management?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but I actually do love that. I mean, I guess to me, I don't want to say I take it for granted, but I forget that it's a part of it because it's just part of our filtration, right? Like sure. Somebody has to be we used to do like an 8 out of 10 for both behavioral and cognitive. And as we started getting more and more candidates, we went, okay, let's do 9 or above. Yeah. Right. And, I mean, dude, the matchup of like, cause there's a different personality, right? Like you had mentioned, I know you have exposure to me and McBilly, right? It's like, he can do steady amounts of the same thing for hours on end. I lose my shit after about 30 minutes of that. Right. Right. I feel like you and I have kind of, I guess you can say, commiserated on that.
The same way. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see how Predictive Index helps you kind of lean into the strengths, because like you said, oftentimes you'll hire somebody based on their experience and you're letting the past dictate the future when really the present is what should be the leading indicator for that. And the problem is most people have no form of measurement. And right. So
it's the data point. It makes it objective rather than being subjective. I think a good way, a good way to explain this, I think for me that makes sense to me is actually, it's a funny story. So, I was raised by a guy, I always joke around, my dad, who I'm very close to. I actually worked with him for about 20 years, but he is a mix between Mike Ditka and General Patton. So super mellow.
Yeah.
Like he's super intense. And so I came home from my senior trip at, 17 or 18. I was with some buddies and we were hanging out in California, and summer's, high school's over and you're trying to think, okay, I'm just going to get this job, get ready for college, whatever. So I had that on my agenda to do. I come home on a Sunday, I think it was like a Sunday, and my dad walks into my room and he says, oh, by the way, I have a job for you tomorrow. And I'm like, well, you have an interview? Like, what are you talking about? He goes, no, you're starting tomorrow. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Now, I didn't say that to him because it's General Patton, right? Because I don't want to get killed.
Right.
I'm like, okay, sounds good. Yes, sir. Tomorrow I'm starting. And I didn't really know anything other than I was supposed to go to a local car. And you remember Larry Schmiller, he was the owner of the Jazz, had several car dealerships across this country. Right. I was supposed to report to Larry Schmiller Chevrolet, go talk to this accounting department, and go talk to this woman named Gail Luth, and the job was waiting for me. So I show up 7 o'clock the next morning. Gail Luth, she had to be like 6'2", cowboy hat, rhinestones, turquoise, smoked non-filtered cigarettes in like 3 seconds, scared the living piss out of me. Yeah, she was super intense. And she directed me to this corner and said, okay, you're doing data entry all day. That's your job. And I was like, okay. And back then it wasn't a computer screen. It was just like paper, and you entered warranties. And if you screwed up, you had to start all over.
Oh my God.
So me being, I could call myself, you understand this works president, kind of a hyper person. The detail, I'm always the bigger new things, innovation, new ideas, venture out. Mm-hmm. You're asking me to sit on a desk all day long and put in data. Mm-hmm. All day freaking long. I want to kill myself. Like, an 8-hour day turned into like a 20-hour day. Like I couldn't even, I would take a full hour lunch break for the first time ever because I could not stand going back to work. Like I would rather watch General Hospital in the parts department sitting on a couch than go back and do data entry. That's how much I hated my job. So if you think about that, about this idea of job demand, what was it about that job? Well, it wasn't intellectually demanding. It wasn't like hard to understand. It wasn't a knowledge skill set things. It's like, what was the job demanding of me that I didn't possess? And what the job demanded of me was patience, routine, process, accuracy, and steadiness of time. I possessed none of those things. It was brutal. Like I sucked so bad at that job. It was so bad. I was brutal. And so I always tell people, if you bought a car in the early 80s from Larry H. Miller, I screwed up your warranty and you probably needed it. I sucked so bad at my job.
That's great.
But I guess the funny story about that is 3 months in, I sheepishly go into Gale and I'm like, hey, there's a new job for a parts or a runner. And my job was to go all over the valley for the internet, go to the auto auction, pick up titles, go to the bank, go to this deal. All day long, I was running around all day long in a new car every 3 or 4 weeks they'd give me. And I would just be running all day long, set my own schedule, do my own hours, meet people. I went from almost being fired to the employee of the month and within 6 months.
Right.
And the only thing that changed was the job demand. Like and I didn't get it at the time. It didn't make sense to me, but the demand of the job was more aligned with who I was. And it was just, the down job became easier.
So, oftentimes, because you had said, steadiness of time, the kind of the things, I can't remember, there was like 4 or 5 there that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But I think oftentimes a lot of people would look at that as a negative thing, like, oh, you're not good at these things, right? How would you speak to that? Because to me, it almost feels like, I feel like being a professional at this point is kind of like when you're playing a video game that you have to like build your character and you get 80 action points and you have to assign them to strength, perception, agility.
Yeah,
and it's like, so I feel like that's very much like we all only have 80 points and we all have them allocated differently, right? And so I have had a lot of conversations where people look at that kind of like pass or fail, right? It's binary of, oh, well, I suck at this or they suck at this, so they suck, right? So talk to me a little bit about how you feel about like the idea of right person, wrong role, or, you know what I mean? Like, and the different, and the ability to see somebody for their strengths, rather than, I guess, for their weaknesses, right? Because it's like,
yeah. So I think there's a lot packed into that I want to answer. So
sure.
First of all, I don't think, well, I think I still believe this, but I've always said, I don't think people show up to work and go, cool, I want to suck today.
Right.
Like I want to piss everyone off, be shitty at my job, and suck. I don't think that usually happens. There's something going on that is causing someone to pull away from that. And part of it is job fit. Right. And so, in this book, Good to Great, that was written in the 90s,
Jim Collins.
It's a great book. Yep. Great book. Jim Collins. He talks about, and he kind of coined this, getting the wrong people on the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus. But people forget the quote that they always forget is actually, he says, is you have to define the seats. It's about putting the right people on the bus in the right seat. And so sometimes you have someone in the bus who's just in the wrong seat, but you have to be able to define that seat, right? What does that seat look like? What is needed in that seat? And then that person might be very talented. They're just in the wrong position on the bus. We just got to move them to a different seat. So it's not that they suck. It's just maybe they suck at the job they're doing right now. The question is why? Secondly, I like your analogy of building these characters because, as you know, in a lot of these games that you play where you have to build these characters, you're usually not a solo person. A lot of times you're combining with other people to do well. It's just the same thing in business. You don't want to combine people with all the same strengths, right? You want to be able to counter set what you're good at with someone else.
That makes a lot of sense.
Depending on what you're trying to achieve in that game.
Right. So the swordsman needs the archer needs the swordsman. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so if the objective is this, maybe the archer's more important than the swordsman, but if the objective changes, then the roles change. Well, you still need both of them. Just where do you need them and why do you need them? You have to be able to figure that out.
Right. Okay. So in your experience doing this, what are some of the lessons or takeaways that you've kind of learned apply damn near to everybody as far as things they have to do to start being able to leverage or create this, talent acquisition machine in their business.
So I think the biggest, there's some pitfalls you have to avoid. Let's talk about those first.
Okay.
I think you have to get out of the mindset of, I'm only looking for resumes for people I don't want to train. Right? So we fall into this pit trap of, okay, they have all these skill sets. This is going to be awesome. I don't have to train them.
Right.
And a lot of times what happens is you hire people with these skill sets, and then you realize they don't apply to what you need, or you tell them the way you're doing it, the way you want them to do it, and they'll say, well, that's not the way I do it. That's not the way I was trained. Right. So sometimes you have to untrain and retrain anyway, and that's a lot harder.
Right.
So the first thing I always tell people is, when you're hiring someone, instead of asking and saying, instead of saying, okay, I don't have to train them, you need to flip the question. You have to ask yourself, what am I not willing to train? And once you start figuring out what you're not willing to train, like they just have to have it because I don't have the time, the bandwidth, the ability, whatever, I'm not willing to train them. If you can start making your list that way, I think it could resonate a little bit more with people. Say, okay, they have to bring this with them because I'm not training them on this.
Yeah. Well, right. That actually kind of goes into a concept I've called drive-by delegation, which is essentially, you hire them and go, yeah, you take it, and there's like the expectation of delivery, but there's like, and if they're anything other, and it's like most people are disappointed with the outcome. Obviously, that's a disaster that's a recipe for disaster. So, I totally agree with that. So, okay, so.
And then I said real quick, number two, when you're looking at, don't view a resume as an end all. Resume is just an autobiography of what they want you to know about them, right? And I'm not saying it's not important. Unfortunately, what we do with resumes sometimes is we have to look at resumes and say, okay, if they've done all these things, cool. How do we vet that, right? But I think you have to look at the resume of, okay, you may have 5 applicants with very similar resumes. The more powerful question is, how do they apply what they know? That's the powerful question. Okay, so if they have similar resumes, how does this person going to apply it? And the way do they apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities, does that fit to what we need in the organization? Because a lone originator is going to be different for different organizations and entrepreneurs and solopreneurs. Like what you get out of that role changes depending on what is needed. So how do I apply all this information I have, and does it fit with what I need?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Now, would you say that, because I know that Predictive Index measures both behavioral and cognitive.
Yeah.
Would you say that the measuring what it needs is more of a behavioral need or a cognitive need?
Say that again.
Well, so you were essentially saying that, I'm going to be paraphrasing here.
Sure.
We've talked through a lot, but you essentially said some version of like identifying what the job needs, right? Yes. And so my question is, when you're looking at that need, when you're looking at a resume and you're trying to figure out how do they apply this, are you looking at that? I mean, do you feel like that's more of a behavioral conversation or more of a cognitive conversation?
I think it's both.
Okay.
So behavioral in the context of, so let's define cognitive. The way we define cognitive ability is how fast you get or take in new information, how fast you take it in, and how fast you apply it. Like, what does that ramp up like? Like, we know, Preston, yours is a higher cognitive. I still think you cheated, but yeah, it's a higher cognitive.
I promise I didn't.
I'm just joking. I'm just teasing.
No, what's funny is so like McBee and I actually agree that we've never tested this, but I would bet money he has a higher IQ than I do. He's more book smart. He's just generally more.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, I think I got like 1 point, or like it's supposed to be like 500 is a perfect score. I got like 495. And so most people in our team that saw that were kind of upset and like, dude, no, there's no way. And I was like, yeah, I think it tests speed rather than like, I don't know that it's test.
How fast you take in information and apply information. Gotcha. It's relative to the job too, right? So like, for example, if I'm like doing a job that's very repetitive and doesn't change a lot, actuaries, I don't know, pick a job where it's just kind of the same thing over and over again. cognitive isn't as impactful or as important than if you're like a B2B salesperson. Or, I always use doctors as an example. An ER surgeon's cognitive is probably higher than a pediatrician. They're both really intelligent. They're both really smart, but the job requirements change because you're getting new stuff as a surgeon that's instantaneous right there.
Like a trauma nurse, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have to think on the fly.
Yes. It's like, it's like you have to be able to take information, make decisions rapidly. And that's really what cognitive measures. The behavioral piece is the application of things. Like, okay, I have you probably met people with MBAs who aren't the brightest people in the world, right? The idea is, okay, this person has an MBA in business. Cool. They did the discipline to go through and get that piece of paper and get that degree. Awesome. Right. And so the question is, you get 2 Harvard MBAs. Doesn't mean they're going to work the same, because what we're not understanding is how do they apply that information? So how much risk do they take in? How much time do they take to make decisions? How do they communicate their ideas? How do they process information? Those kind of things are not in a resume. And you don't hire a resume, you hire a whole person. A person who actually comes to work for you every day. You need to understand that whole person, not just a part of who they are.
That makes sense.
We're fill in some of those pieces with some data.
Yeah. So, you and I are mavericks, right? By the Predictive Index.
I'm not quite a maverick. Now, I'm not quite as cool as you. I don't have an airplane. I don't come with like a co-pilot.
What? I thought you were a maverick.
No, I'm a persuader.
Okay. I feel like
the A and B are flipped a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay. So, my thing is, I when we look at like McBee's a much more centered individual, and like on mine, like I'm so far out, I'm actually covering up the descriptor, like words that tell you what you're even measuring. And so it's like, what is some of your advice? Let's say somebody that's listening to this is going, okay, well, I need people, I need to grow. I get that. And okay, so you're saying I need somebody different than me. Okay, I get that. So a lot of these people that are listening, right, loan originators, they at best have small teams, and most of them are going to be, individuals trying to navigate all this themselves, wearing a ton of hats. So how do you take somebody that's, and if they're an originator, they're probably more like you or me than, that process or persona that you talked about. So what would you recommend for them as far as, okay, let's say they find the person that complements them very well, but it's also a very different style of just being, right? Like McBilly lives very differently than me, and we've had kind of to dance to learn how he is and how I am. I'm very independent. He's very interdependent, right? There's like we're like opposites, right? Sure. And so I feel like we've done a good job, but we've almost treated this like couples therapy over the years, where it's like, we want to make sure this works, so we hire advisors to help us navigate this. But for somebody that may not have that reflection, how would you empower somebody to, empower somebody they bring on with a very different behavioral map?
So I've been doing this for a long time. And even I will meet some people. So let's just back up a little bit.
Okay.
So what we're trying to measure is we're trying to measure drives. What drives you? What are your drivers? Like, what do you drive? And so then from there we say, okay, if this drives you, for example, yours would be like, one of your drives would be, you have a drive to exert yourself on people and events. That's one of your highest drives, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? Well, that means that you need autonomy, right? And you need the ability to make your own decisions. And you need to be able to venture out. And you need to be able to think vision. And you need to think long-term. And you need to be able to pivot. I hate that business word, but I'm going to use it anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so there's your drive. Therefore, this is what you need, right? From relationships and work. And so the behaviors you then see are maybe eager to jump in, assertive, looks to solve problems, those kinds of things. So the problem is, if we're only going based off of the behaviors, because that's usually what we see as people, when we interview people, when we talk to people, when we work with people, we don't get to understand their drives and needs. We don't understand those things. We're going off of what we observe, the observable behavior. And if we're only making judgments off of observable behavior, we're going to be wrong. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been wrong. You think you observe a behavior and you think you know what it is, and it's actually not what you think it is. Because we're filtering it through our own experiences and through our own PIs and through our own stuff. So I don't know how you ever figure out, to be honest with you, a person is a good fit or not unless you have some kind of objective data like Predictive Index. And the first thing you have to figure out is, who are you? What are your drivers? What are you really good at? And sometimes what we're really good at is also our biggest gap. I think, Preston, that's one of the things for you. I mean, you're such a visionary guy and outside the box thinker and all those things. That's awesome. And we talked about this first time I talked to you. That's good to know. But sometimes what happens is you pivot too quickly, right? Because you have so many good ideas. You want to incorporate all of them, and you just can't do that. So how do I, and that's where McBilly comes in, right? Because he can help organize some of those things and kind of look at those things and say, okay, great revenue ideas. What's going to be most profitable to us, and how do we sustain it? How do we hold people accountable to it? So that's where that complementary skill set kind of comes in, right? So I don't know how you do that with some kind of objective tool. You have to have that objective tool because you have to have that emotional intelligence, that self-awareness to really sink into the data and know how it applies to you and how you're trying to grow your business.
That makes sense. So, I mean, I think it's a good time. You know, I have more questions for you, but why don't you take a second to kind of just plug Predictive Index? Like, talk a little bit about what it is. I mean, I feel like we've already touched on it, right? But like, if there's anything that you feel we've missed and or how it should be applied to a business or used, why don't we just take this moment since we're here? I'd imagine that some people that are listening are going, okay, well, that sounds great. And okay, so I need objective data. What next? What does that look like, right?
So, I mean, and you can find it in other tools. Obviously, I'm very partial to Predictive Index. I think it's an amazing tool. I think it's good for all the things we talked about. So you can go to our website if you wanted to, wisemanstrategies.com, and check out our website, see what it looks like. And Lindsay and our team will get back to you if you want to take a free assessment. There's a link on there. You can take a free assessment. So go ahead and take it for yourself, get the data, and then we'll get back to you and kind of walk through the assessment, no charge.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, everybody should get the assessment like that. It's so, like, putting definition on something that's otherwise pretty, like, just hard to define is really nice.
Yeah, it's like vague.
Yeah.
And Mark Twain said something, I love this quote. I'm going to screw it up. He said something, it's not what we know for sure that gets us in trouble. No, it's not what we think we know that gets in trouble. It's what we think we know for sure that gets us in trouble. Right? It's this idea of, okay, it's not what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's what we think we know that's true that just isn't. And that's a self-awareness piece, really. It's this idea of like, this is what I think I know is true, but it just isn't true.
Right.
It's not what we don't know.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So
that's why PI is so valuable. You need to know, you have to have, because some people really think, oh, this is just who I am, and I'm like this, and then they take the data and they go, this isn't me, and then everyone around them goes, yeah, it is.
Well, the thing that I love about, and I won't spoil it because I feel like it's part of the magic, but the thing I loved about Predictive Index is how insanely accurate it was based on 2 questions.
Yes.
That to me was like, I remember when I got done submitting this, they answered the second question, and it was like, you're done. And I was like, what? How could you possibly? What are you talking about?
Point. Some people think these things are like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's 6.5 minutes, really. And the reason why, Preston, is it's a response to stimulus tool. So all we're doing is asking you one question and then give you a bunch of stimuli. And then there's a mathematical weight to those words that you choose. So I don't want to give it away either, but it's a great, simple, fast, objective way to get good data.
Well, so what I'd like to do is kind of pivot, if you will, and
I want to can we do a show where we just make fun of business words?
Sure, I think that's good.
I just literally want to mock them all because I just I have a hard stop. Like, what does a hard stop mean? Why can't we just say my meeting has to end at 2? Why hard stop? What's a soft stop? Is there a medium stop? Like, you roll through the stop sign? And, I mean, how does this work?
That's great. I want to kind of walk through our hiring process because I think there's things that I would be curious about your opinions on what we're doing. Because obviously I want to improve, but also I think there's things we are doing right. I think there's things we could do doing better. And either way, whether it's validation from you or a correction from you, I think there's something that the audience could take from this. So I'm going to walk through our process and then you can kind of tell me what you like, what you don't, what you would change if you were me. Okay. So we essentially,
what I would do is I would lose the hat. No, I'm just totally.
Oh, Tony.
You look good in that hat, actually.
I appreciate that. Thank you. You know, it's funny. I actually get a lot of hate in the ads that we run about the beanie, and people.
Weird.
People have, everybody wants to have judgments, I guess. People will say I would never trust somebody that wears a jacket and a beanie together. I'm like, that's a really weird boundary to set for yourself. All right. I mean, that's a self-limiting belief, but
Specific. Like, that's a very specific thing you don't like. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's like a beanie hate crime.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like,
it's weird.
The necessity of that comment, which I think is
I know.
So, and the code, that's what throws me. If you haven't,
I know.
Pretty okay, but.
So we're running, we create posts on Indeed, and oftentimes they're not even sponsored, right? So what we used to do was we would try to get like fun with the language to be like, because we're Good Vibes Squad, right? It's like, but then we realized it's actually better if we're just clear, right? This is what you're doing. Okay. So we started doing that. And so we run these posts, on Indeed. And then that's literally the only platform that we do, and we get hundreds of candidates. And then what we do from there is
stop right there for a second and talk about postings. Do you mind?
Let's do it. Let's do that.
So data shows you have 14 seconds on a posting to get someone interested. So you're right. The fun and cute things are like a lot of tech companies want to do this, but actually, a couple mistakes that people make. They talk about their company first. It's not about the company. It's about the person. We want the person to visualize them doing the work. So any verbiage that you can put in there that if you know who you're attracting, like what kinds of people you need, behaviorally and skill-based, you got 14 seconds to get them to keep reading. That's what you're trying to do. And what are those first 3 or 4 sentences? And that's not a lot. I mean, you think about 14 seconds, just start reading.
Yeah.
You're maybe 3 or 4.
It's a paragraph at best.
Yeah. So maybe you're 3 or 4 sentences, and if people don't like it, they're done.
They're done. Okay. That's great. That's powerful, and I'll take note of that. I actually, it makes me want to kind of have my copywriter go through and make sure that our posts are really relevant for the personality in which we're looking for. That's a good point. So we're putting these posts on Indeed, and then what happens is people apply, and then our executive assistant goes through and invites. No. At the end of our application, there's the essentially we give them the ability to take the behavioral assessment. If they take the behavioral assessment, we reach out to them and we give them the cognitive assessment. If they do both of them, well, let me rephrase that. If they do the behavioral and it's like a 9 or above, we give them the cognitive, right? And then from there, if the cognitive is a 9 or above, and this is out of 10 for everybody listening, right? It's essentially 10 is ideal fit. The job and the person are like one and the same, and you found a unicorn. A 9 is like you're going to be pretty damn happy. And then obviously a 1 is I should have never done this in the first place, right? So just to give the
wrong
idea.
Seat, yeah. Maybe on the bus, they're just in the wrong seat, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
But so we're doing that, and then when we get somebody that does an average of 9 or above between the two, behavioral and cognitive, then our executive assistant reaches out to schedule a first interview, and then that's usually with a member of leadership team, and then if that goes well, they invite them back for a second interview with another member of the leadership team, and then essentially we view all candidates have made it all the way through the end and try to deduce, and I actually feel the last few times we've been really lucky. We've had more people we wanted to hire than we had jobs for, right? Which is a much better place to be in than I've been on both ends of the spectrum, and my God, it feels so much better, because like there was one time where we had one job and 2 like 10 out of 10 candidates. We literally did create another job because within that team, because we were like,
you want to hire talent. Yeah.
I don't want to let them go, could be years before they're back on the market, So that's essentially the hiring process. And then after that, we obviously make an offer, but they're aware during the first interviews when we talk, we actually have a conversation around the money as well as, what the expectations in the job, and we try to sort fit. And we also try to get a gauge for just culture, right? Because I've also interviewed people where on paper they were a 9 or a 10, and then we talked, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, the behavioral and the cognitive didn't talk for culture fit necessarily, right? I feel like that's the one you got to kind of self-source. I'd like to hear your thought on that.
No, so culture's funny. What about culture? But then when you, so we have clients ranging from, clients like you guys are growing and scaling. I think when we started working with you guys, are maybe 30 or 40 employees. Now,
Probably 30,
yeah.
maybe 30, like 20, 25 or 30.
So clients like that, we like you are growing and scaling. And then we have clients that've been in business for a long time who have 10,000, 15,000 employees, right? And so they use this for different types of things. And every one of them talk about cultures kind of the last 10 years, right? And some people think, culture is ping pong tables and unlimited PTO and, their mission or value statement or whatever. I think you have to define culture as there's macro cultures and micro cultures. The macro culture is what you believe as a company and what you hone in on. And it's something you have to be very definitive about. It can't be just like subjective, right? Like, what does that mean? I think PI is a part of that. Knowing what you value in culture is directly tied to who you are and what drives you. So the micro cultures, that's where that comes in. So you can have a macro culture in a big org. This is what we care about. This is who we are, whatever.
I think those should be called hard culture and soft culture.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, go hard and soft. I mean, I'm macro, micro. You can do whatever you want. I think we should start some new business terms. I think we can call it, we can do a deeper dive on the culture and then pivot on the hard stop at 3. I mean, we could go.
You fit those all in there really masterfully. That's great.
You like that? I throw up a lot during the day on these calls when people start throwing business terms at me. It makes me want to puke. So this idea then, who I am as a leader, let's say I'm over a division, who I am and what I care about and what I value is going to determine which parts of the culture I'm going to pick on and go, this is what's valuable. Other ones we're going to say, it's not as valuable. So right. Behavior has a lot to do with that, actually, in a lot of ways.
Okay, so
people, go ahead.
Oh, no. Keep going.
I was going to say, there's going to be some people who are going to naturally grasp onto your culture just because it's innate to who they are.
Okay.
There's going to be other people who are going to say, okay, this job that we're asking them to do is a little bit different than what our culture is, but we need different. Like, let's say our culture, one of our cultural values is be curious. That's something we care about. But we want a job where we don't want curious. We want you to do it the same way every freaking time without even, don't ask why, just do it. Like,
you have a misalignment.
Yeah. It's like, and so, it's okay that they're curious. The question is, will they do that job exactly how it's assigned and follow the process every time without exception? Be curious in that space. Do you know what I'm saying? So we have
that makes sense. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit to that person who knows they need to hire, right? They got nothing. They haven't even created a post yet.
Cousins, they've been to their friends, they've been through their...
Yeah. Well, and everything else is work, right? And I'm not saying that like they don't want to do the work, but it's unfamiliar territory, right? And what I found in business growth is that whole people prefer a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven really reigns true. They'd rather stay in their capped, business than they would experience the discomfort of growth. Yeah. And so for somebody that's at that point, but they go, you know what? No, I do want to grow. And they got nothing. What would you recommend as some starting points for them to be able to, source and identify great talent and to bring them in?
Yeah, so the first thing, and this is going to sound maybe ethereal or whatever, but I think the first thing you have to be is very honest with yourself and ask the question, why do I want to grow? Right? And think there's a lot of different answers to that question. And if you can answer that question honestly, it's going to help you understand who you need to recruit. Because some people just want to grow for growth's sake. But any client I onboard, I always ask this question: what is the goal? Like, what are you trying to achieve? I signed on a client not too long ago who said, I want to get to 100 million in sales. I'm like, cool. Why that number? Tell me more about that. And the more we talked about it, the more unpack it, the more we understand it. Now we can start giving them recruiting advice. Okay, if that's true, and here's why you're trying to do this, let's start thinking about who you need to recruit then, and who you need to find to hit that goal.
That makes
Sometimes
sense.
Goals are just arbitrary. Like we just think, oh, that would be cool. Or it'd be really cool to go tell my family I'm making $3 million this year. I mean, I don't care what the reason is, but let's be honest about what that reason is.
Sure. No, that definitely dictates how you get there.
Yeah. And then let's figure out, okay, if that's what it is, let's create a roadmap to find the types of people that can help you get to what you need.
Right.
The other question you have to ask is, what am I really good at? What am I not good at? What do I like doing? What do I don't like doing? Like, what is it? So if you think about like someone, if you just do something simple, like, so I ran, my team is 5. For a long time, it was 2 of us or 3 of us. Usually it was 2. And we just wanted to keep it small on purpose. That was our goal. We didn't want to get bigger than that. We just wanted to keep it this small, little intimate kind of niche-based business. And we've grown since then for a couple of different reasons. But the idea then is, okay, let's look at this and say, if I can answer the why, and then I can get to the what needs to happen because of the why, and then you can start recruiting and filling your talent around that, it makes more sense about who you're trying to develop. But you have to understand who you are.
Right.
Like, what am I good at? What do I not like doing? Right. And then backfill that way. Like, then kind of working backwards.
Have you ever read any books from Dan Sullivan or Benjamin Hardy?
Not Benjamin Hardy, no, but Dan Sullivan, yes.
So they co-authored a book, they co-authored a series of books, Who Not How, Gap in the Gain, and we actually got to meet, McBilly and I went to one of the masterminds wherein we had a week in Mexico, last week actually, with Mexico, and we spent a pretty intimate, like, hour or two, somewhere between an hour and 2, with Benjamin Hardy, and he was going over a lot of the concepts in the 10x is easier than 2x, which is, it releases like next month, and they both collaborated on it. And it really played in, and there were some concepts that kind of link. There's definitely a connection between like that 10x book, Who Not How, and Gap in the Gain. But it was essentially the concept of, if you want to go to 10x, you have to be willing to find out, instead of how do you do this, who will do this for you. And you need to, it's that your world will change, but you can either get rid of things, some things you can't get rid of. And if you can't get rid of them, you have to find the right person to handle them so that you can actually grow. And as he essentially talks about the inverse of, and the reason 10x is easier than 2x is 2x requires you, or for 2x, you can keep about 80% of what you're doing right now, change about 20% of it and get some linear growth, right? And on 10x, it's like you have to abandon or be willing to abandon about 80% of what you do, what you know, and really like hone in on and master the 20% that you're great at, and magnify that, and just delegate everything else or abandon it, right? And so the example that he gave was actually his Ben's son Caleb. They live in Orlando, and they were doing a tennis practice, and his coach had asked him at tennis practice, hey Caleb, you ever thought about going pro, right? And he's like, no, not really, right? Hey, this is a teen, so these are kind of one of those like parental conversations that you have with your kid. And so that was kind of it. On the ride home, Ben asked Caleb again, he goes, hey, did you think, have you thought anything more about what your coach said? And he was like, what about going pro? And he goes, no. And he goes, I know you want to go to college and get a scholarship for that, but I think you should consider that. And so they talked more about it, and eventually Caleb was like, he's like, yeah, actually it would be cool to be a pro, right? And what Ben talked to us, he goes, in Orlando, there's thousands of coaches that are plenty well qualified to help my son get into college with a scholarship. That's not honestly that big of a difference from what we're doing now. He's like, but the question starts to change when we go, okay, well, if the destination is not college, it's pro, there probably is less than 5 coaches around us that can actually help him develop to that point. And that's assuming he only needs one coach to do that. We may have to have other coaches, right? And so it's this idea that there are much fewer paths to 10x something. Therefore, there's more clarity. It's not easy, right? The work is not easy. But if you try to 10x something instead of 2xing it, because 2x can be achieved with linear growth over time, right? Incremental changes, small tweaks. Yeah. But that 10x is like you have to abandon conventional wisdom and get really creative and specific about what you will do and are, what you're willing and able to do to grow. And it also is a filter for, like, if you're doing bullshit right now, you can hide that at 2x because you're like, well, I can keep doing this and juggle. You can't do none of that bullshit to get to 10x, right? So it really runs this filter. But the thing that I thought I thought a lot of it was profound, but the idea of the 80% most likely isn't all going away. But if you don't have the right people in the right spaces to be able to put that labor, to be able to have, and one of the things I've learned on this journey is there's a bunch of stuff that I used to be like, who would want to do that? And it's like, I've actually just learned, everything I hate, there's somebody out there that just geeks out on it. Now to me, that's weird, but that's why they're not me. Right. And I just learned to kind of embrace. Right. Yeah. And so I think that understanding is part of why McBee and I have been able to, thrive in each other's presence in this partnership.
And I think your analogy of the college and pro thought process it's a good analogy. I guess it was this gentleman who written this book, which I haven't read, but this idea I think comes back to this point of, by the way, it's okay to be a college tennis player.
Right.
That's okay. Like, if you weren't just being a college tennis or even a high school tennis player, you have to be honest with what you are,
right,
what you need, and the work you're willing to put in. And then who are the people I need to surround myself to get there? Like, we don't all need to be pro tennis players, right?
Sure.
It's like this idea of, like, what does that look like? And then how do you surround yourself with the right people to get where you want to go? Mm-hmm. But you have to look inward, right? It's that, it's the quote by, I just forgot his name. Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl, yes. He talks about response to stimuli, right? That it's actually the space between response to stimuli that gives us our growth and freedom. And from a PI perspective, what that means is, here's my natural drivers. Something happens. Here's how I want to respond to it. And Frankl talks about, well, it's not just about responding to stimuli. It's the space between. It's the time between the stimulus and the response where you get to choose what you want to do. And it's usually contrary to the response that you want to let go that really gives you your growth and freedom. So, like, do you have the ability as a business owner, as you're starting a business, understanding this just happened, here's how I'm going to respond. I need to hire someone who sees the same stimulus but responds differently. And I have to let them do that. I have to step out of that. And because the way I'm responding to it is not growing the business like I need it to, I need to find someone who looks at the stimuli differently and responds differently and be okay with that.
That's powerful. Wow.
It's hard to do.
Yeah. No, that's, wow. Yeah, that's a lot. That's something to chew on, though. I mean, because I think that that requires a very high level of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Or at least an understanding that you need to have self-awareness and figure that out real quick,
Yeah. And by the way, it's going to drive batshit crazy. Because there's something's going to happen. I mean, it happens in my own team. I do this for a living. Something's going to happen. A stimuli is going to happen. And I'm going to go, this is how I'm going to respond to it. Yet someone else on my team is going to look at that and respond to it a totally different way. That's probably beneficial. It's a better way. And that's what I hired them to do. But it drives me batshit crazy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, man. That makes sense. That's great. Well, so I got one more question for you before we close out here, Tony. What do you feel is a book or a piece of content that you've consumed in recent years that you feel should be required reading for people that would listen to this podcast?
It's funny because we just actually were talking about this as a team, I think 2 weeks ago, throwing out all these different books that you should read and all these different things. Because one of the things we help as an Lendsetter product, so we do what I call functional management training. We have a lot of these tier 2 and tier 3 leaders who are given leadership responsibilities and they're individual contributors. So they don't know how to understand time management as relates to a group of people. They don't understand situational leadership. They don't understand how to do one-on-one feedback and course correct and conflict resolution. They just don't, because no one's taught them. So we're having this conversation, like what books should be companions? And so it's funny that you bring this up. So a book that I've loved forever, I think we talked about earlier today, was Good to Great. I just love that book. I think I like it because I have a hard time with leadership books that are very ethereal. Yeah. They don't give you any information. It's just kind of like, ideas or suggestions or, I mean, like servant leadership, I like want to throw up every time I hear that. Not because the book's not bad, because it's a great book, actually. It's just that we take it and we misconstrue it and we think about it that way. And like The Speed of Trust is another one that I think is it's a really good book.
Was that Kobe?
Yeah, Covey. We just bastardize it. You know what I mean? We just make it almost repugnant for me. It's almost a gag reflex. So I like anything that makes you think, that adds some kind of process or data or results to it. I think Good to Great's a good one for that. I think, especially for someone who's starting to build a business, because it really goes to this idea of how do you take something that is good, right? A good company, and how do you elevate it to make it great? And what does the process look like? Right? I kind of like that. This is weird. It's not really leadership or business books, but I do like reading a lot of Malcolm Gladwell because it makes you think about things that are different, the different way of looking at things, right? The Tipping Point or, Multiply, those kind of books where it's like, okay, what does that mean to me as I'm trying to grow my business and think differently than I think, right? There's a lot of books out there. A book that's a really easy read that kind of talks about what this 2X and 10X thing that you're talking about. I think it's called All Good CEOs Are Lazy.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's All Good CEOs Are Lazy, something like that. And basically it talks about the concept of what you're talking about. Once you get to a certain part of a CEO, your job isn't to be in control of everything. Your job is to be a leader of leaders and find the right people and give them the right tools to be successful. If you're the CEO and you're dabbling in operations and finance and in sales and manufacturing and production, and you're deep in there, you're probably not a very good CEO.
I feel like as I've ascended and developed myself, through a company that's grown and grown and grown, and the way that you lead a large organization versus a small one just seems to be so different, and the way, like, I feel like the necessity as your organization grows, the necessity for the CEO to make less but higher quality decisions becomes massively more important, right?
Yeah, I think there's obviously those strategic decisions, but you have to surround yourself with people who are better than you or smarter than you, who think different than you, which is really hard, right? You don't want to be the smartest guy in the room as the CEO, because that's going to be problematic, because you're going to be solving all the problems, right? You want to find really, really talented people who can do their area of expertise really, really well, and are collaborators and team players who aren't going to, this is mine, right? I own this. The other thing I think as a CEO or a leader, like you guys are getting to that point, I think once you get around 100 employees, it gets really kind of hard, a lot harder to touch and understand exactly what's going on. So you really need
I already feel that.
Yeah. So like, for example, when you start out, your organization was flat. Which, okay, what does that mean? Well, again, organizations are a living, breathing thing. You knew kind of everything that was going on. You had your fingers in a lot of different pies. You were influential in different parts of the business. And so typically in flat organizations, things happen quickly. There's a lot of idea generation. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of innovation. As you start to layer people, whether it goes to more matrix style or more of a hierarchical, and it starts to get a little more segmented, and we start layering management in, then the organizational starts to change. It's more command. You make decisions based off of maybe siloed thought processes sometimes than it used to be. Even in matrix style, it's what does my job and start and begin based on these new jobs. And so you see job creep happening, entitled that, and all these things start happening as you start to grow. So you have to be very conscientious and intentional about why you want to grow and how you want to grow. It's like when you add a new job, one of the things you have to ask yourself, even if you're a one-person company, what is the impact of the role I'm trying to hire? Like, why are we hiring this role? Why are we creating this role? What impact is it going to have on me and the company? If you can't answer that, and if you're only thinking about tasks that they're going to be doing, you probably shouldn't have that job.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. That's huge. So Tony, for those that want to reach out or even just take you up on that free assessment, where do they need to go?
So wisemanstrategies.com is the best place. If you want, I would say don't email me, because I'll probably off doing 1,000 different things. I would say email Lindsay at wisemanstrategies.com, and I can send this to you too, Preston.
Yeah, send it to me. I'll put it in the description of this episode. I think that'd be wonderful. And if nothing else, if you're watching this, I can tell you right now, Predictive Index and working with Tony and his team has made a profound impact on Good Vibe Squad. I'm reluctant to say this, but they could charge more than we pay it. Don't tell anybody else I said that, Tony.
Listen, I said this to you when you signed on. Look, this fee is really small.
Yeah.
Because our idea is we want to grow with you, right? Mm-hmm. So as you grow, we grow. We're not into pillaging, and we don't charge a lot of upfront fees. What we want to do is have this thought of growing with you, and as you grow, we'll grow with you.
Yeah.
I mean, Space Storage is a good example of that. I think when I first started working with them 20 plus years ago, there was 300 employees. Now they're, ginormous, and they use this for a portion of what they do inside their organization still.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, well, it becomes very, like, requirement's not the right word, but it becomes so effective that it's like I can't imagine the absence, so that's kind of it's a good place to be as a service. Yeah. So, awesome. Well, I will put that in, I'll put the email and the URL in the description, both on the video and on the podcast. So if you guys want more information from Tony and his team, I would strongly recommend it. I would definitely recommend at the least take that assessment so you can have a starting point of understanding yourself better and increasing your self-awareness. And that will allow you to, as you're looking at people and jobs, you'll be able to make more strategic decisions. And because you know yourself, you'll know how you'll work with somebody else better. So I think that's a phenomenal starting point. So Tony, thank you.
Someone from my team will reach out to you, probably Craig or me or someone.
Okay, cool. Yeah. There you go. I love it. Well, Tony, thank you for joining us on the Lendsetter show today. I appreciate you, my man. And aside from the podcast, thanks for everything you do for us. We appreciate you.
No, we like working with guys like you, so appreciate it too.
Awesome, bro. Take care, guys.